And so this morning, we're going to be looking at ways to reducing the crime trend in the country. And with me to discuss this is Dr. Sipasad, Dr. Randy Sipasad. Dr. Sipasad is a criminologist and coordinator of the criminology unit at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Sipasad holds a PhD from the University of Toronto and an MPhil degree from the University of Cambridge. Dr. Sipasad specializes in research methodology and statistics and has research interests in economic deprivation and crime, gang violence, youth crime, justice, and penology. And so joining me right now is Dr. Sipasad. Dr. Sipasad, let's jump right in. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Dr. Sipasad, can you hear me? All right, so we seem to be having some issues with Dr. Sipasad, but I know that he was going to come on the show this morning and just talk to us about those crime trends that we're seeing. Of course, Ayinka and Rokas, you all would have remembered what happened on Monday, right? Well, even before that, over the weekend with the crime. And somebody pointed it out on Facebook to us as well. Remember, it's not just the 3 young men who died that morning, but there were also 4 in Maracas, and there were a whole heap of others that happened. But I'm hearing that Dr. Sipasad is back, so let's see if we can get him. Dr. Sipasad, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm fine, Dr. Sipasad. So glad that you're back.
Thank you.
Now, I know that we are grounding the conversation in context, and so we would have been looking at the 13 murders or so that would have taken place over a 36-hour period from last Friday to Sunday. And when we're talking about crime, a lot of people actually bring in the issue of social issues and how that can actually have a part to play in crime and violence. Can you share some of those social issues that people might be talking about?
Right. So the criminological literature will tell you that there are really a lot of them, whether it's issues in the community, issues of unemployment, issues within the family, such as socialization of children, etc. The thing about it is, the core thing is that there are a lot of drivers for the crime problem. And the approach that we're taking doesn't actually address the drivers or the causes, but rather just deal with the symptoms. So when you take a suppressive approach, meaning policing, imprisonment, and all of that, while that is absolutely necessary, it leaves the causes of the problem intact. And as long as you leave the causes of the problem, those very social issues that you're talking about, then the problem will continue. And what's really unfortunate for us, and I think worldwide as well, is that the COVID situation actually made things worse. While there would have been a short-term decrease in crime because of people staying at home and all of that, and not out in public places where they would be more likely to be victimized, the long-term effect would really hinge upon the heightened levels of economic deprivation which we are now facing in the country, meaning increased rates of joblessness, unemployment, poverty, etc. And the long-term consequence for that would definitely be an increase in criminality in the country. So we need to address these kinds of underlying social problems if we really want to tackle the crime problem.
Now, one of the causes that you mentioned, Dr. Sipasad, would have been the role of the family, and I wanted to unpack that a bit. How important is the role of the family as it relates to what we're seeing now and even what we might be seeing in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
Right, so the family is probably one of the most critical things to consider. You could either make or break a child in that sense, because it's during the first few years of life, during that time of primary socialization, that you really build that moral structure, you build a sense of values, etc. of the child, right? Even where children, though, come from families which are less than ideal in terms of that moral fiber and moral structure, we have the school system, which captures the youths at an age when you could still mold them. The problem is we fail to see as a nation that we can use the education system as a means to address the crime problem. Now, the education system is a system that accesses all of the youths from primary and secondary school age. But, of course, the educational part of it, what's on the formal curriculum, is very, very important. We're not saying no to that. However, given that you have all of the youths of the nation as sort of a captive audience, if you will, in the educational system, you could also utilize the education system as a means of also building that moral grounding and the values. So once you get youths early enough, you could do something about it. So I would say the family and any other type of social institution, whether it's the educational institution, community institutions, etc., which have access to youths at an early age and that could help mold and shape them. That's absolutely critical.
Now let's look at some of the data, Dr. Sipasad. So we have already crossed 200 murders for the year. And
Yes.
of course, given the fact that we have this crime rate and what you would have seen over the past few years, I mean, do you expect to see a significant increase in crime as we head throughout the rest or the second part of the year?
That's a definite yes. In fact, it so happens just about 2 days ago, I utilized the crime data from 1990 to 2019 to predict future crime trends up to 2030. And I used something called ARIMA modeling, which is autoregressive integrated moving averages. It's a type of statistical analysis. And what the predictions show is that the crime values are going to go up. Now, what will make it actually worse, as I said, is the COVID situation, which has exacerbated things in terms of the economic deprivation and the level of hopelessness that some segments of the society feel. So because of that, my prediction definitely would be that this particular year would be perhaps a year that would mark the highest number of murders ever recorded in Trinidad and Tobago. At least that's what the data suggests. But it's not just murders. If you look at robberies, you look at other types of offenses, you actually see them going up as well. So I think we're in for a lot of problems. And if this is not a wake-up call for this government, for any governments past or future, then we're in a lot of trouble. Because if we continue with business as usual, and you simply look at the crime trends and where they are going, and I'm not talking my subjective interpretation of where they should go, but I'm talking about predictions using statistical modeling. You're saying business as usual isn't working, right? And business as usual is that we put more emphasis on the suppressive side, meaning imprison people more, utilize arrest as a strategy more, etc. And we do not look at the social side. Government after government after government has failed to adequately put emphasis and the funding on the social side. In fact, it's the external funding agencies like the UN or like USAID, etc., who would come in and put the funding for the social side because they recognize the importance of it, right? And if we continue to go down the road where we do what we think the public wants, which, mind you, is a misunderstanding, but we do, when I say we, I mean the governments, do what they think the public wants, which means more punitive approaches, obviously that alone is failing, right? And quite interestingly, the Ministry of National Security is just about wrapping up a national survey. And one of the things that the report showed is that the public of Trinidad and Tobago is very strongly in support of the social side of it. And that's a bit of good news, right? It's not that the public wants the suppressive side, the death penalty, the hangings, the imprisonment, the policing. They don't believe that that's the solution. And that was very, very clear, in fact, in the results of the ministry's survey.
Now, Dr. Sipasad, you spoke a lot about the social side, and I know that one of the social sides, of course, could be those interventions that you're talking about. But give us some more details. Social side in terms of, is it that you're talking about social services, maybe more therapy for children? Are you talking about more food cards? I mean, what is the social side?
Right. So the social side, there are a lot of things that could come under there. But what you really want when you talk about the social side, broadly speaking, is that you develop data-driven crime reduction plans, or what we sometimes call community safety plans for various communities. Because what you will find in practice is that when you go into various areas, there are different problems that stand out. In some communities, the key problems might be drug use and drug sales. In another community, it might be domestic violence and violence in the home. In another community, it might be gangs. So what happens in practice is that in any particular community, there might be multiple core problems which are actually driving the level of youth engagement and the engagement of persons generally in delinquent activities or in criminal activities. So what you need to do is have your solutions data driven in the sense that you do some kind of empirical analysis. You determine what are the core problems in particular communities, and persons who are there, in the communities, the residents, the community organizations, etc., they would already have a very good sense of what these particular issues are. Once you identify the issues, then you draw upon the very wide range of social interventions that are there to select interventions and to adapt them for the needs of the particular community. So there's no one size fit all. I can't tell you it's poverty reduction. I can't tell you it's dealing with the family alone. It's really a multiplicity of things which really are focused on the core problems of the particular place and time.
Right. I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I know that some people are saying that we do have the laws, right? So as much as we do dealing with the social side, we have the laws as well to guide. But how do the laws play a part in tandem with the social interventions that we've been discussing?
Right. So the thing is, the laws do make provisions for those things, right? And I will give you an example. If you look at the juvenile justice system, not too long ago, at least before the Juvenile Court Project came into being, which was an initiative of the United Nations, the UNDP, in Trinidad and Tobago, which really revamped the juvenile justice system. What the laws would have told you is that if youths break the law, there are about 15 or 16 different alternatives that you could send them to. So the courts could give a disposition of psychological counseling and all of these kinds of softer side, these kinds of interventions that are really suitable for youths. But in practice, what really happened up to only a few years ago? In practice, what happened was that youths would be sent to secure facilities like St. Jude's or St. Michael's or YTC. And when you speak to the magistrates and you ask them, why is it that you would send a child to these facilities as opposed to give them the care that they need, the straight answer would be that there are no alternative dispositions for the youths. So the laws do already make provisions many times for these types of alternative social sides of the intervention. The problem is there is a massive shortage of this. What you find in practice happening is that there are a handful of NGOs working in the communities, struggling every year to get government subventions to keep their operations going. And these are the organizations that are trying to provide some of the social side of the intervention. But again, doing so with extremely limited resources, extremely limited staffing as a result, right? So the laws sometimes are up to date. It's the things that are required to support the laws that really are the problem.
Right. And Dr. Sipasad, I read that you were working with the former chairman of the Children's Authority, Hanif Benjamin. Is it that you're working on an organization or some sort of group that can help the victims who would have suffered from incidences of crime? Can you speak some more to that?
Right. So this is a brainchild of Hanif. It's certainly in its very, very formative stages. I've only spoken to him a couple of times so far about the initiative, but it's something that's very, very useful. He is indeed trying to set up an NGO which provides some of the kinds of social services that young people need. And too often we overlook the fact that these things are necessary. And I'll give you a very good example. Some years ago, Dolly and Associates offered a program called the Nature Nurture program. And they had I'll tell you what the program is, but the sad thing is they had to approach successive governments and basically beg and beg and beg to get a little bit of funding. And what it was a program that provided psychological counseling to youths who had lost a parent or a family member due to gang violence. Now, you could imagine the level of psychological trauma that these youths undergo. And I just want to give you one quick example here. I remember interviewing one of these youths while we were asked to evaluate a particular program. And I asked them, what is it that you want to do with your life? And you would be surprised, this little 11-year-old child told me that his goal in life was to go to prison so that he could kill the person who killed his father. So the person who killed his father was imprisoned at the time for murder. And imagine a youth growing up with this kind of psychological trauma. And this kind of psychological trauma left unchecked and unattended and that youth growing up in a community with criminal gangs, that youth is a prime candidate to join a criminal gang. And this is the type of thing that we have happening in our country. And these are the types of things that governments, successive governments, don't see as important to fund. But these are the next generation of gang members. And we neglect to see that there is a social side. There is something that is really important, something that is lacking, that we need to do to really heal the psyche of the country and the youths and the people, right? As long as we don't do that, the problems and the scars will remain,
Will
right?
continue,
And so what
yes.
Hanif is doing is really excellent work.
All right. Well, Dr. Sipasad, thank you so much for joining us on the Now Morning Show. I mean, we can go on and on, but, you know, this is where we have to end, at least for this portion of the discussion. So thank you so much again for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
And that was Dr. Randy Sipasad, a criminologist who was just giving us an idea of what we can expect to see in our country if it is we don't put these very, very important social interventions in the country to help those who may be at risk. You're on the Now Morning Show. We're going to take a break and be right back. Stay with us.